Welcome, weary traveler. The fire is low, and the shadows are growing long. In the quiet space between waking and dreaming, a story is waiting to be told. So close your eyes, take a slow breath, and listen. Let us take you somewhere else for a while. Long before the first Witcher strode the path, in an age when magic was still a wild and untamed river, there existed a quiet conclave of mages known as the Order of the Gentle Hand. They were not sorcerers who sought power or dominion, but rather scholars of stillness, philosophers of essence. They believed that the deepest truths of the world were not hidden in explosive incantations or whispered curses, but in the silent language of the earth itself, the slow growth of a tree, the patient journey of a river, the ancient slumber of a mountain. Their greatest ambition, a project they called the First Accord, was not to create warriors, but to create bridges. They wished to gently weave a human soul with the spirit of nature, not to conquer it, but to understand it from within. Their sanctuary was a secluded valley called Glen Tegan, the Vale of the Fair Beginnings. Nestled deep within the Blue Mountains, far from the squabbles of kings and the clamor of cities. Here, the air was always clean and cool, tasting of pine and damp stone. The Order's towers were not imposing spires of dark granite, but low, round structures of river rock and living wood, their roofs thatched with moss that bloomed with tiny star-like flowers after a rain. In one such tower, where the morning sun filtered through a high window woven from willow branches, an old mage named Lyra was beginning her day. Her hair was the color of spun moonlight, and her hands, though wrinkled with age, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. She was the last keeper of the Accord's history, the final living memory of what had transpired in this peaceful valley so many centuries ago. Today was the anniversary, a day she marked not with ceremony or ritual, but with a quiet pilgrimage. She dressed in simple robes of undyed wool, the color of a morning cloud. She ate a small meal of honeyed porridge and fresh berries, listening to the birdsong that spilled in through her open window. There was no hurry in her movements. Time in Glen Tegan flowed differently, less like a charging steed and more like sap rising in a maple tree. When she was ready, she took up a walking staff of polished rowan wood and stepped out into the cool morning. The path from her tower was not paved, but worn into the soft earth by generations of gentle feet. It wound its way downward through groves of whispering birch trees, whose white bark seemed to hold the faint light of the moon, even in the daytime. The air was rich with the scent of loam and decaying leaves, a sweet, earthy perfume that spoke of life and rest. Lyra breathed it in deeply, her eyes closed for a moment, feeling the calm of the valley settle over her like a warm blanket. Her first destination was a wide, sun-dappled clearing at the heart of an ancient oak forest. The trees here were immense, their branches forming a high, green canopy that rustled with a sound like a distant sea. In the very center of the clearing stood one oak that was grander than all the others. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, covered in a lush blanket of emerald moss, and its roots were like mighty knuckles gripping the earth. This was not merely a tree. This was Ronan. He had been the first volunteer for the Accord, a strong, kind man with a laugh as deep as a drum. Ronan had always felt more at home in the forest than in any library or laboratory. He had yearned to understand the slow, powerful life of the woods, and so the mages of the Gentle Hand had gathered on a summer solstice, and with chants as soft as the buzzing of bees, they had helped him weave his spirit with that of a Sylvan, an ancient guardian of the wood. The process had been peaceful, a slow, warm unfurling. Ronan had not cried out in pain or fear. He had simply smiled, a look of profound wonder on his face as he felt his awareness expand beyond the limits of his skin, reaching down into the soil and up into the light. Over the following seasons, his human form had softened, his skin taking on the texture of bark, his hair greening like new leaves. He had not died. He had simply become. Lyra approached the great oak and laid a gentle hand upon its rough, warm bark. She could feel a slow, deep pulse beneath her palm. Not a heartbeat, but a thrum of life that was impossibly ancient and patient. "Good morning, old friend," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the air. "The sun is warm today. The deer were drinking from the upper stream at dawn." She did not expect an answer in words, but she received one nonetheless. It came as a feeling, a wave of immense, unshakable peace that washed over her. It was the feeling of roots drawing water, of leaves turning to the sun, of acorns sleeping in the soil, dreaming of the trees they would become. It was Ronan's contentment, deeper than any human emotion, a peace that spanned centuries. She sat at the base of the great oak, her back against its trunk, and stayed there for a long time, simply breathing in sync with the forest, her own thoughts slowing to a gentle, quiet rhythm. After a while, she rose, patting the bark one last time, and continued on her way. Her path now led her downwards, following the sound of running water. She came to a brook that tumbled and chuckled over smooth gray stones. The water was so clear it was almost invisible, and small silver fish darted in the pools. This place belonged to Ilara. Ilara had been a mage of water, a woman whose moods had often been as changeable as a river. She was fascinated by flow, by change, by the way water could be both gentle and powerful. For her accord, she had chosen to bind with an undine, a spirit of the stream. And like Ronan, she had found not a loss of self, but an expansion of it. Lyra knelt by the water's edge, trailing her fingers in the current. The water was cool and silky, and as she held her hand there, she felt a different kind of peace from Ronan's steadfast calm. This was a playful peace, a feeling of constant, joyful movement. It was the sensation of smoothing stone, of carrying fallen leaves downstream, of reflecting the endless sky. It was Ilara's spirit, no longer contained by a body, but free to dance and flow with the water, from the mountain spring down to the distant sea, and back again as rain. Lyra remembered Ilara's laughter, which had always sounded like bubbling water. She smiled, feeling that same joy now, a gentle echo in the murmur of the brook. She watched the light dapple on the surface, saw the world reflected and beautifully distorted, and felt a quiet happiness for her friend, who had found the perfect form for her boundless soul. Her final visit for the day was higher up on a windswept tor that overlooked the entire valley. The path here was steeper, winding through hardy gorse and heather. The air grew thinner, and the dominant sound was the sighing of the wind as it moved through the rocks and tough grasses. At the very summit was a cluster of standing stones, weathered by ages of wind and rain. They hummed with a faint, almost inaudible vibration. This was the domain of Kale. Kale had been a quiet, contemplative scholar, a man of thoughts and ideas. He loved the sky, the clouds, the vast emptiness that held the world. He had chosen to bind his consciousness with a sylph, a spirit of the air. His transformation had been the most subtle of all. One breezy afternoon, he had simply dissolved. His body became mist, and the mist was taken by the wind, spreading his awareness across the entire valley. Lyra stood in the center of the standing stones and turned her face up to the sky. She closed her eyes and felt the breeze on her skin. It was more than just moving air. It was a presence. It carried the scent of pine from the forest below, the coolness of the stream, the warmth of the sun-baked rock. It was Caelle's consciousness, touching everything, seeing everything, a silent, peaceful observer of the turning world. It was a piece of vast perspective, of seeing the whole tapestry from above, where every thread had its place. Lyra stayed on the tor as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and rose. She had visited her friends. The Order had been judged a failure by the outside world, their work dismissed as folly because it did not produce powerful archmages or magical weapons. They had simply allowed their finest members to fade into the landscape. But Lyra knew the truth. The First Accord was not a failure. It was the ultimate success. Her friends had not been lost. They had been found. They had achieved a connection with the world so profound that they had become part of its gentle, enduring song. As twilight began to deepen, blanketing the valley in soft, gray-blue shadows, Lyra made her way slowly back to her tower. The lights from her windows were a warm, golden glow in the dusk. Inside, she lit a single candle and sat in her favorite worn armchair. She did not read or write. She simply sat, her heart full of the peace of her friends, the deep-rooted peace of the oak tree, the joyful, flowing peace of the stream, the vast, knowing peace of the wind. She was the keeper of their memories, the last voice to tell their story. But she knew that even when she was gone, they would remain. They were the valley now. Their gentle spirits were woven into the very fabric of Glen Tegan, a silent, eternal lullaby for any who were quiet enough to listen. Feeling the day's long walk in her bones, a pleasant, heavy tiredness, Lyra's eyelids grew heavy. Her breathing deepened, falling into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep, joining the quiet, peaceful breathing of the ancient, magical valley all around her.